This sitting is resumed.
Order number 3, sir. In the name of the Honorable Attorney General and Minister of Legal Affairs, to move the second reading of the Barbados Identity Management Bill 2021.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph. Please turn on your mic.
I'm known to bellow, sir. Mr. Speaker, I am delighted to be able to move the passing of this particular bill. Perhaps had circumstances been otherwise, we would have had it being moved by the Honorable Minister in the Senate. But be that as it may, it is perhaps more important for us in the lower house, because the Barbados ID, sir, is that which generation after generation of Barbadians journey to the polls with and present to the presiding officer as that thing which establishes them beyond any doubt as an individual called an elector. Mr. Speaker, our national ID has an interesting history, and I hope that at some point in time it will be written. What we know as our national ID existed, so far as my research tells me, only from 1979. From 1979, as a result of a statutory instrument which itself came into force under the aegis of the Statistics Act, gave genesis to this thing that we hold so dear, a national ID. Now, there are the philosophers among us who will say that a national ID is not such a thing that can be reduced into a bit of laminated plastic and those kinds of interesting and important arguments. But what we use as evidence of who we are has nothing to do with our personality or our soul or our very being. It has to do with that piece of plastic that is laminated and embossed. It is not generally known, Mr. Speaker, that we do not have any primary legislation that establishes a national ID as it is. We simply don't. And in fact, prior to 1979, when our blue ID card came into force and came into being, while there was an ID, it appears not to have had the substratum of legal authority. So yes, sir, prior to 1979, we did have ID cards. But I'm told by those individuals who were immersed in the electoral process as far back as the 1960s, that what entitled you to vote was in part the national ID, in part the yellow ID, but more importantly was the fact that you had an election circular with your name on it and that somebody in the polls, working in the polls, knew who you were. A far cry from today, sir. But whether that history, as has been related to me, is accurate or not, what is clear is that only from 1979, Mr. Speaker, do we have the benefit of a national ID that becomes law pursuant to the Statistics Act, Cap 192, first passed, first enacted in 1958. Now, I suppose one could say, well, just get to the point. But it would do us well, sir, to reflect on the fact that a lot of the challenges that we currently have and experience with our national ID are born out of the fact that we have never had a piece of constating legislation. We've never had a piece of legislation which says, it shall henceforth be declared that this is our ID. All that we've had, sir, is a statutory instrument gazetted in April of 1979 under the Statistics Act. Now, the fact is, sir, that the Statistics Act in itself had nothing to do with the establishment of a national ID either. The Statistics Act was just a piece of legislation passed in 1958, which had as its purpose the garnering of information about what was happening in Barbados. That's all it did. But the then Prime Minister, Tom Adams, in 1979, brought into existence a statutory instrument which, in addition to dealing with census requirements, gave birth for the first time to a national ID, properly so-called. And it has served us well over the years. But we all have our experiences with the national ID, sir. Some I wouldn't bother to recount on this occasion, but I remember being present overseas, and it was on a mission to do with international business, and the president of a particular offshore company, looking youthful, sought to present his ID to gain entrance into a particular establishment. And I had a red passport, and others had their passports, but he had his national ID that had been in his wallet for way too long. And when he pulled it out, sir, it shackled out in two. The left half and the right half. And the security at the place, never mind that he was long in the tooth, said that he wasn't going to allow him to come in with that piece of plastic. And sir, on that occasion, I felt a little bit embarrassed, because here was a person who was denied entry to a place, not because of his chronological age, but because the very appearance of what we hold dear, that blue piece of card, laminated and embossed, simply could not pass muster when you looked at it. And how many of us, sir, look at our ID cards and realize that the plastic is beginning to fray and is dog-eared? And sometimes when you travel and somebody asks you for ID, you think to yourself, I ain't taking out that. I show him my passport, because at least my passport looked official. I'm not risking taking out this piece of plastic that the two ends coming apart, because left to an individual, left to myself, I would look at it and say to you, bring something else. I don't want that. The time has come, Mr. Speaker, when we need to grapple with the issue of that pictorial representation of who we are. And let us not fool ourselves. That is not who Barbadians are. That is not the essence of our being. No way. However, for our day-to-day activity, we still need to be able to present something as evidence that I am who I say I am. Isn't it a little bit strange, Mr. Speaker, that people actually prefer now to use their plastic Barbados ID, their plastic Barbados driver's license, than the ID, because somehow or another the driver's license, by its appearance, appears to be more imbued with the authority of the state than the piece of paper. And anybody who is involved in electoral politics or banking or any of those things will readily tell you that there are people walking around Barbados on two legs who have national IDs who should not have them. And there are people who are walking around with national IDs who somehow or another have never paid a visit to the Office of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, but somehow have an ID card. And then there are others who we know who vote in one constituency in election, and by 3 o'clock, with a different ID card, we are told to went and vote in another. And these are our anecdotal things that help us to, we smile at them. But it calls into question, Mr. Speaker, the security of that document, that instrument, that we say to Barbadians, you should walk with, not you have to, but you should walk with it, especially now during the pandemic and during the curfew and the lockdown. You should walk with it to demonstrate, to be able to satisfy the authorities that you are who you say you are. Mr. Speaker, we have been about this matter of a new national ID for a long time. When we were in opposition, the last administration bought a large number of ID cards which were never used and which we eventually had to dump. All that money went down the drain. I think it was many millions of dollars. And it went down the drain, I have to be fair, simply because it took too long to implement. And by the time we came to government and started to look seriously at it, that technology was now like the dinosaurs. We have an opportunity now, Mr. Speaker, to do something which, very much like the last bill, can address a fundamental need, but also provide the foundation to transform how we do things in Barbados. The last debate that we had, and I'm delighted that that bill has passed, though I didn't have the opportunity to speak in it, that last debate talked about money, how we spend, how we do things, how we interact with each other as beings who use money as an agent of exchange and bartering. For the longest time, Mr. Speaker, we have maintained that a Barbadian ought to be able to get on a bus or access services by using his ID card. If a credit card can have money on it, why can we not put a pensioner's funds or a mother who is receiving maintenance or some other person who is getting the benefit from the state, the financial benefit from the state, why can we not put those payments on a simple ID card? Why do we have to have an ID card for the purpose of showing who I am, but a driver's license that is made of something different? So I don't have to walk with two things instead of one. Why, sir? But today we have an opportunity with technology. We have an opportunity to begin to relook how we deal with this issue of our national identity card, not our identity, but our identity card, and try to make it fit for purpose in a modern and dynamic Barbados. Mr. Speaker, yesterday, today, the day before that, we had old age pensioners. I don't know that we need to put old age in front of them. So let's just, permit me to retract and just say pensioners, sir. Who, well, with my new hirsute gray look, I have to be very careful how I address such issues. But we have pensioners, Mr. Speaker, who go to a post office to cash a check and to stand in a line in circumstances where, by just deciding, we could change how we do it. We have Barbadians, Mr. Speaker, who will go to a financial institution and be told, you have to bring 3 pieces of ID. How many of us have not had that experience? How many of us have not had that indignity thrust on us. Because, Mr. Speaker, we walk to a bank or other institution, and that which should be sufficient is not. You have a Barbados ID issued by the government of Barbados, but when you walk into a financial institution and you put it down and say, I want to open a bank account, they say, that's not enough, bring 2 more. So you now got to go and bring your passport. But is that not also issued by the government of Barbados? And if one is good enough, why do I need to bring the other? And then you have to bring proof of address. So anybody who's never had a phone bill or worked anywhere have no chance because they have no proof. How many of us, especially those of us with young men and women or children who've never worked, but you want them to open a bank account, and they're told, well, bring 2 pieces of ID, bring 3 pieces of ID, something. But one of them must be a bill. Well, how does a 19-year-old who come to open a bank account have a bill? What kind of bill you can have? A phone bill, a light bill, a water bill, a credit card bill? You have the bill. So we have an environment, sir, that really, well, government should not feel it needs to get into everything. There are some things that we could do that would hopefully eliminate some of the headache that we have to contend with. Why should my national ID not be sufficient for a bank? Why not? There's no good reason why it isn't. But when we say that, we have to admit that perhaps the reason it isn't is because the circumstances of its genesis are such that it's susceptible to fraud. Mr. Speaker, I have promised to be brief. What do we need today? We need a secure form of ID that is available for Barbadians, that is available for anybody who is entitled to register, and that will establish with the maximum level of certainty that I am who I say I am. Happily, technology has brought us to a place where we are now able to do that. And this national ID bill will once and for all give our ID the power and authority of statute that it so badly needs, and will establish a certain framework for its issue and for its management. Now, Mr. Speaker, let us get this clear, because the most popular vocation in Barbados now is that of the conspiracy theorist. So, lest somebody says that we bring in this to somehow influence some upcoming election, let me address this issue in advance. This ID has no effect on the electoral process. The electoral process, governed by the Representation of the People Act, is unchanged. If you are an elector under Section 7, I think it is, of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission, under the Representation of the People Act, then you are. And you vote and you deal with all those things under the Representation of the People Act. These two things are connected only because the head of the Electoral and Boundaries Commission is also the chief registering officer. They're connected only because one method of establishing who I am when I go to vote is by producing a national ID. That's the only way that they're connected. But what we're doing today does not in any way modify or abrogate the arrangements under the Representation of People Act. This bill has nothing to do with elections. This bill has to do with being able to have a certain and clear regime for the issuing of the Barbados ID. A lot of it is not new. A lot of what we had in the 1979 statutory instrument is replicated. You will go and produce all of your documentation, but permit me to come back to it. How many of you have had to apply for a passport and be told you have to bring a birth certificate? But of course, in order to get your ID card, you had to bring your birth certificate too, didn't you? So why do you have to do it twice? It gets really bizarre when you go to renew a passport, because it means that they already have your birth certificate. But until you go bring it again. As if somehow the second time around, it better. Mr. Speaker, what this tells us is that we have to rationalize how government relates to its citizens. And for my part, I believe that when once I have produced my birth certificate, I should never have to produce it again, not so long as I am dealing with their government. And this is where this begins to take us, Mr. Speaker. And it's clear that we have to dovetail all of our various departments of government. Because when once a person establishes for the purposes of an ID card that my name is Dale Marshall, then it is time for Dale Marshall to apply for his passport, then it should be sufficient that I produce my ID card, because the Electoral and Boundaries Commission will have been able to establish and certify to their fullest satisfaction all of the things that are predicated, on which the grant of a passport is predicated. Mr. Speaker, this ID card, for those of us who are technophiles, will have, as part of its features, a chip. And what is a chip, for the benefit of my mother, who, if she's listening or watching, is not too computer savvy? It is just a device that is embedded in the physical ID card itself, which has data on it. And what kind of data? That data, Mr. Speaker, would include such things as your fingerprint, if you wish. Because at the end of the day, when you present your ID card, somebody ought to be able to authenticate it. You ought to be able to authenticate it. And therefore, your national ID card, when now issued, will have a chip which will have data on it, and that data is protected, and that data is available to the individuals with whom you're dealing if you so desire. Now, this really, it is not a long bill. It is only about 34 or 35 sections. But what it speaks to is a modern environment for doing something that we've come to take for granted. And you know, perhaps the challenge is that we're so accustomed to it that somebody will say, well, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. But, Mr. Speaker, we can do what we do now so much better. Because for the first time, we have the benefit of technology. And that technology will see an individual having a single ID card, which will also have your driver's license on it. And it will have medical information on it if you desire. It will have your fingerprints on it if you desire. So that a person to whom you present your ID card, if they ask you to authenticate who you are, you may opt to say, well, let me give my fingerprint. And by touching your fingerprint, I mean, we all have cell phones. Well, a few, not long ago, Apple iPhones, you used to be able to use your fingerprint to identify yourself as the owner of the phone. Now, let me make this clear, fingerprints, under the last administration, they wanted to make fingerprints mandatory. The last administration wanted to introduce a new ID card, not too dissimilar. This one is just a whole lot better. But one of the hallmarks of what they were doing was that you had to give your fingerprints, all 10. And in opposition, we took the position, no, sir, this is not a police state. And we cannot agree as a responsible political party representing Barbadians that they needed to give this kind of data. And know that we are in government and have the opportunity to put these things in place. Our position is that you can give your fingerprint if you wish, but you cannot be compelled to do so. And in fact, and I am fairly lost when it comes to technology, but there are methods of authentication using various things. I apologize to the chamber, but you know, I can barely manage an iPad and a mobile phone. And if I tried to explain the technology behind it, I'm quite sure they would get it wrong. But you don't have to worry about that or wait for me to explain it, because part of the rollout of this will be a solid campaign explaining to the public why this ID card is even more secure. Because it is possible for a person to be walking around with an ID card with the name Dale Marshall on it, and then present it to a financial institution. Not that there's any point these days, but if presented to somebody, let's pick somebody else, not a financial institution. If they present to somebody else, if the person presenting cannot authenticate it, then it is rejected. So it's, I'm not doing business with you, because you have not authenticated to me that you are the person presenting it. So the opportunities for fraud and so on are immediately reduced. So, Mr. Speaker, I've promised not to delay the chamber overly long. In many respects, this is not new. What we did back then, back in 1979, is being updated and being made to be more technologically relevant. In those days, I remember you had all the boxes, if you any remember, you had all the little boxes on the form. You had to put each letter in the box precisely and all that kind of stuff. We've come a long way since then. But you will still have to present your birth certificate. You will still have to present all those kinds of things. But you know what? As a government, we see an opportunity to better serve Barbadians through the use of a national ID card that is secure, relevant, and accessible in a way that we couldn't do back then. Mr. Speaker, on registering, you will have to supply the same kind of information as before. Marriage certificate, birth certificate, change of name, all those kinds of things. No different. We're not asking for anything different. But what will be the end product will be significantly more secure. The idea that somebody else will be walking around with an ID card marked Colin Jordan, being able to convince somebody that they are Colin Jordan, will not be possible. And what is an ID card, sir? If it isn't a way of vouchsafing to a third party that you are who you say you are. Mr. Speaker, it isn't a complex bill. We've strengthened in fact, for the first time, I believe you can say, we now have specific clauses which create as criminal offenses if you try to impersonate somebody by using an ID card that's fraudulent. Didn't happen before. We simply did not have it. The police would have had to charge with all kinds of other offenses. But now for the first time, we have a bill that says that if you, using an ID card, attempts to convey that you are not, that's not the language, but that's the essence of it, that you are somebody, I don't know who you really are, then you're guilty of an offense and may be liable to be charged as much as $40,000. I think that the time has come, Mr. Speaker, when we do away with that laminated plastic. I think the time has come when we should imbue our ID cards with security measures that are cutting edge and world class. And we have it within our fingertips, and we should not allow this opportunity to pass us by. I commend this bill to this chamber, and I look forward to us going into a new era where the tools that we give to citizens are tools that are relevant and that are workable in a modern Barbados. And I'm obliged to you, sir.
Honourable member, we have to move the second reading.
Make room this bill be read the first time. Second time.
Honourable Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I would try not to be long as well. I am always a little wary, more than a bit suspicious, when a defense is presented before a charge is laid. Now, the Honourable Member for St. Joseph, I imagine, can understand our language. He deals in the law. But he seemed to anticipate a charge from the lips of someone or some ones that this is about some pending election. Well, he will not hear that charge from me today. He will not hear that charge from me today, simply because the defense was presented, has already been presented, and we will leave it for the wider opinion of the public to judge and for time to reveal. I have a concern which I want to register at the outset, and I think it relates to the context of this discussion because it has to do with the management of people's personal information. And that derives from the current exercise ongoing under a program called Seek and Save, which is being led by principals out of the University of the West Indies on behalf of the Ministry of Health, the government of Barbados. And I have been privately concerned, and beyond that private concern, I want to express publicly my concern as to how that information, having been collated, is utilized, how and where it is stored, and who would have access to that, and for what purpose. Beyond the current exercise, will it be used? We have been told through advertised messages, all kinds of stuff. You don't have to give names, you don't have to do this, you don't have to do that. But what I hear people saying to me is that these are some of the very things that we're asked to do, information we're asked to provide. Now, you can't be suggesting one thing as being the regime, and then in practice, in reality, something else applies. And somebody ought to put that right. Outside of that, of course, our greater concern is related to the future use and storage and management of this information beyond the purview of those at the University of the West Indies who manage the project, and beyond the auspices and purview of the Ministry of Health. Will this information be used by other entities in the public sector, government, or outside of that? Because as I understand it, the exercise in data collection relates very much to the current management response to the COVID threat. I think that needs to be clarified. The Attorney General talks about penalties under this legislation for false information being presented, for false premises being used to secure identification cards, or misuse of the information in relation to this national ID, etc., etc. Now in clause 4 and at 10, we're told that the information in this, the information collated under this national registration exercise will not be allowed to inspection by members of the public. One would imagine that this is because it is believed this is personal information and to some extent private information, therefore. But it is also a national register. And I wonder if it is a national register, if that in itself does not make it somewhat subject to scrutiny by public eye, perhaps in a structured or regimented context. Not necessarily that the register should be open to the whims and fancies of people's curiosity, but that somehow it should be made subject to the scrutiny of the public in a structured and regimented or under a structured regime, because in fact, it is a national register. I just raised that because I think that that is a query that carries some merit. Now, under clause 9, which appears on page 21, Mr. Speaker, at 5, a person who has been issued with an identification card or a national identity credential shall notify the chief registering officer of any change in his place of residence within 30 days of the change of address, etc., etc. Mr. Speaker, you and I well know we deal with the real culture of Barbadian life. We live where the sociology makes itself abundantly evident. And that is, Mr. Speaker, there can be, during the course of a year, especially for young men, multiple changes of residential address because of their social relationships or for other means. But principally so perhaps because of social relationships, social connections, in the context of which a guy is living in Industry Road today, Mr. Speaker. Tomorrow, he's living on Horse Hill. And 2 months beyond that, he's living in the Pine. And though I understand the need for your national ID to reflect as close as possible the reality that constitutes your being, your existence, you can see a situation easily where it can become awkward for a fella who lives that kind of experience to have to be informing and advising the chief registering officer of those multiple changes in place of residence within 30 days of the change. It is a stipulation more likely to be observed in the breach than anything else. Now, with respect to this chip, this digital chip, which the blessed mother of the Honorable Member of St. Joseph would not understand because she is not, she doesn't have an affinity for the use of the technology, like many of us. In clause, in part two, which is at page 49, Mr. Speaker, at 14 and 15, and it speaks to particulars contained in this digital chip of the ID card. 14 talks about, well, before 14 you have specific data sets which will be collected and collated. 14 talks about other representations or unique identifiers that may be stored electronically. And that leaves it pretty much in the realm of uncertainty. I suppose one would argue that it has to do with unique identifiers, so you can't specify or provide for it. But just to note that that leaves us a little bit in the realm of the unspecified. And at 15, other personal data required pursuant to a relevant enactment on international convention to which Barbados is a party, also a little bit of the unknown applies there. Do not know that it can be avoided, but it is a reality in the legislation as right now outlined. Now, we are told that this information can be shared with other government entities. I'm not too sure exactly what that means. If you're using an ID card or what have you, of course you can use it with one state entity, you can use it with another, etc. But the info which is collated on you, and I believe it refers to all these data sets that we have here, can be shared with other government entities. And we are not made to understand anything about the context in which that would be occasioned. And that is a question that remains unanswered as well for me. Now, the Honorable Attorney General says this has nothing to do with elections, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. Of course, your ID card is used when it comes to election and all of this stuff. But on page 44, which is part of the second schedule as well, requires that you give information relative to your polling district and relative to your constituency. And that those electoral matters, and they may be absolutely necessary, I am not sure, but they are here. I know there are other ways of determining what's a man's or woman's polling district, where or which constituency does he or she come from, rather than necessarily have it embedded in some format on some card, whether it is in digital form or otherwise. I don't have any significantly strong objections to the bill, just to raise those questions and to ask perhaps for some answers, which to others might be obvious, but to me, not so. Thank you, sir.
Honorary Member for St. George North.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Thanks so much for the opportunity to be speaking on the Barbados Identity Management Bill, one which speaks about digital technology and being able to use this digital means to do so. I am speaking in support of the bill before us, but I just want to have us focus for a while on just a few comments. COVID-19 has ushered in a number of changes for all of us. For many of us, I guess we can now hardly imagine a life without Zoom or WebEx or Google Meets or some other platform. These and other innovations continue to add value. And I say add value to our lives and our capacity to relate to each other. Indeed, the fact that I'm here speaking in this session via Zoom is testimony to that. Digitization of our economies is now key to our economic development. And I think that what we are discussing here is a very important step in our effort to develop economically through digitization. The bill before us therefore outlines yet another step in Barbados's journey to becoming a digital economy. The process of digitizing the IDs, as we have heard outlined by the honorable member for St. Joseph, is to increase the provision of a single legal document, which will align all of the biodata that we have on our national ID, our driver's license, and so on. And the overarching objective would be for it to promote easier access to all who would have the ID to public and private services. And it is within this particular context, therefore, that I want to center my contribution. For while COVID-19 has sped up digital transformation by several years within the last year, in many respects, I guess it can be classified as a quantum leap. But yet there is skepticism that is rife surrounding COVID-19 and everything else related to COVID-19 or unrelated. Mr. Speaker, uncertainty increases skepticism and it undermines support for what we might think would be this simplest and most straightforward initiatives. Achieving easier access to service only has relevance to some of us. We're in pursuit of the objective. We are also moving to ensure inclusivity and digital literacy as a genuine civic responsibility. And I start there. The digital divide does not only have to do with access to technology. The digital divide is also concerned with those who fall through the net because they're not computer literate and they may not be literate at all. The term digital divide is often used to describe differences in ICTs that relate to such factors as age, health, education, income, culture, you name it. But lack of education and income compound the issue, compound the other divide factors, and increase the resistance that some people may have towards initiatives such as this. Now, the honorable member for St. Joseph made mention of conspiracy theorists and lack of education will make conspiracy theories even seem to have relevance to those who ordinarily might not be moved by such things. My simple point, Mr. Speaker, is that more has to be done to ensure that citizens obtain an education or the level of education required to make sure that digital engagement is understood by them and it is beneficial to them. I'm not suggesting that this has only to be a government priority, because I'm very aware that governments alone don't develop productive internet services. I'm suggesting that digital education must be seen as a collective responsibility of government, yes, but civil society and other institutions as well. Because ICTs are having a greater impact on our global economy, on our national economy, and on our social processes. I heard in the earlier debate and in this one that it can promote access to such things as social benefits like pension or maternity benefits and so on. And if a person finds themselves in a position where they don't know or they lack access to the technology that would facilitate the advantages that we expect should be brought to bear by digital technologies, then a person may consider that they are being left behind. Speaking of the have-nots, in case of maybe income, or the cannots in terms of the education gap, only a short while ago, I was confronted with a situation with one individual who's reaching out to me because they are in a situation in a household where nobody's working, the internet got cut off, and it means that the children and grandchildren are also cut off from their access to education. Why am I going there? Because the person who finds themselves in that particular situation is a person who feels disenfranchised and who will not see the positives in steps like this that we are discussing, who will only then be able to relate to it with cynicism and mistrust because they lack certain basic means. Digital literacy, when we look from an international perspective, is one of the objectives outlined in the UN Sustainable Development Goals, specifically Goal 4, where the aim is to increase access and to increase the share of people who will have access to technologies and so on. Being inclusive is the point that I'm making in this context, means making sure, therefore, that our citizens have access not only to hardware, have access not only to software, but the tools and the means to access technology. I heard also reference being made to the security features in the card. And that is something that we must not only convey by simple means of information sharing, but I think that we must go a bit deeper and teach about cybersecurity as Barbados finds itself launching out and pursuing more digital means of engagement. It was explained to me that the ID card has a number of security elements in it, which are very tight. But how do we get that information communicated to the wider population? I heard mention being made of a rollout of a sensitization plan program where we will speak about the efficiencies that we consider are in the technology being rolled out. But beyond that, I think that our people, it is important for our people, Mr. Speaker, to be educated on the simple benefits and the simple challenges that they can encounter when they do transactions online. How do they secure themselves as they do different online transactions of the nature that we have been speaking about earlier this morning and a short while ago? How do they position themselves to protect themselves as they use a digital ID for various forms of transaction? And then it raises the issue too of a digital footprint. If you have a digital ID, you're leaving your digital footprint all over. We need to be able to train our citizens, not just those people who will be interested and would reach out for that kind of training, but we need to be able to train our citizens on how simple uses of social media and sites that they frequent can have implications on job opportunities and other opportunities that they might be interested in pursuing later on in life. So I'm looking, Mr. Speaker, or the suggestion coming from me to this chamber is that we should be looking at a holistic rollout of a digital education strategy. I know we've spoken much of it, but while we are keeping pace or attempting to keep pace with a number of the transformations taking place in the digital world, I think that our training and our education is lagging a bit behind. The final thing that I will speak about is the need to manage community perceptions. I'm sure very painfully during the past few weeks, we have come closely to recognize the importance of community perception, even when we are making or pursuing decisions that we believe or that we know to be in the best interest of the whole. Community perceptions result not only or relate not only to conspiracy theories or theorists, but it also results from barriers that people have because they simply do not know. So that person that might hear chip and might think that it is something you eat with chicken or so. So training and sensitization must therefore be properly targeted across all levels of our society so that we are addressing not only knowledge gaps, we are addressing community perceptions, we are minimizing the potential for mistrust and cynicism that might be felt by those who feel disenfranchised and even those who don't feel or who aren't disenfranchised, but just who would find themselves not connecting to the benefits of the good initiatives that are being rolled out. Knowledge sharing has to be a bridge in managing a divide, and the digital divide in particular. People will want to know what happens with their data. And we shouldn't become defensive when suggestions are put out there to us about security. Because if people don't know, they don't know. And the government must therefore move with haste to fulfill its duty to inform citizens across all levels about these things. What, if any, will be the implications or the costs to end users or customers by the implementation of these modernized systems like the national payment system as well? Mr. Speaker, full information and digital literacy is the corollary of the citizens' right to know about the advances and changes that are taking place around them and that are impacting them directly and indirectly. In short, what am I saying? I'm saying what I have had cause to say on a number of other occasions. Building public confidence and trust through dialogue is crucial. It is crucial in making policy measures effective. Policy measures may be good, but if there is not trust and confidence in the system, they start to lose their effectiveness, especially in times of heightened social tension and a lack of mistrust in institutions. Strengthened respect for and reliance on mechanisms of social dialogue will create a strong basis for building the commitment of our people. I look forward not only to a rollout or sensitization within groups, the people of the security measures of the national ID that has been on the discussion, but I look forward to a very holistic and targeted communication and training rollout in our schools across our communities so that this and other benefits being explored as this, the national ID and the payment system that we spoke about, for instance, that they will not only be in place to make a difference, but that they will actually make a difference, not just to the few, but to all citizens. Mr. Speaker, I'm obliged and I support the measure before us, the bill before us.
Honorable Member for St. Joseph.
Mr. Speaker, thank you very much for the opportunity, and I welcome the intervention of the Leader of the Opposition and also the Honourable Member for St. George North. The sensitization program is going to be key because there's much about what we're doing that is new, and I think it is fair to say that Most people are filled with some trepidation when you're dealing with the new and unfamiliar, especially when it appears as though what you're doing is technocentric. But let me give the assurance that this will just be a new form of ID card. It will differ because the benefit of modern technology allows us to do more with the device, with the instrument than previously, but only for the purpose of being advantageous and offering to Barbadians more and more significant access to benefits, both in terms of its use as an ID card, but also in terms of the add-ons that we can provide for citizenry. And therefore, I beg to move that it be read a second time. And Sandy?
I second that, sir.
The question that this bill be read a second time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
Beg to move, Mr. Speaker, that you do now leave the chair and that the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill.
I second that, sir.
The question is that the Speaker do not leave the chair and the House resolve itself into committee for further consideration of this bill. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Me think the ayes have it.
This House is not in committee.
Earlier bill, this one will be done in parts as well. Part 1, clauses 1 to 3.
Seconder? The question is that part 1, clauses 1 to 3 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 2, clauses 4 to 9.
Question is that part 2, clauses 4 to 9 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 3, clauses 10 to 15.
Beg to move that part 3 stand part.
Question is that part 3, clauses 10 to 15 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 4, clauses 16 to 18.
Beg to move that part 4 stand part.
Question is that part 4, clauses 16 to 18 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 5, clauses 19 to 21.
Beg to move, Mr. Speaker, that part 5 stand part.
Madam Chair.
Question is that part 5, clauses 19 to 21 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 6, clauses 22 to 23.
Beg to move that part 6 stand part.
Question is that clause 6, part 6, clauses 22 and 23 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 7, clauses 24 to 28.
Beg to move that part 4 stand
Part
Part
7.
7.
part 7 stand part.
Question is that part 7, clauses 24 to 28 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Part 8, clauses 29 to 34.
Beg to move that part 8 stand part.
Question is that part 8, clauses 29 to 34 stand par. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
First schedule.
Beg to move that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill.
Question is that the first schedule be the first schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Second schedule.
Beg to move that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill.
Question is that the second schedule be the second schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Third schedule.
Beg to move that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill.
Question is that the third schedule be the third schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fourth schedule.
Beg to move that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill.
Question is that the fourth schedule be the fourth schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Fifth schedule.
Beg to move that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill.
Question is that the fifth schedule be the fifth schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Sixth schedule.
Beg to move that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill.
Question is that the sixth schedule be the sixth schedule to the bill. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Beg to move that you do now report, Madam Chairman, to His Honor the Speaker, the passing of one billing committee.
Question is, I do now report to His Honor the Speaker the passing of one billing committee. All honorable members in favor, please say aye. All those against, please say nay. Methinks the ayes have it.
Adjourn till next year.
Chairman of committee has reported the passing of one bill in committee. The question is that this bill be read a third time. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it.
Beg to move this bill do now pass and be cited as the Barbados Identity Management Act 2021.
The question is that the aforementioned bill be passed and so cited. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This bill is passed and so cited. Honorable Leader of Government Business.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With that, we've come to the end of today's sit-in. I beg to move the adjournment of the sit-in until Friday, the 5th of March at 10 a.m.
The question is that this honorable chamber stands adjourned until Friday, the 5th day of March at 10 a.m. in the forenoon. All those honorable members in favor, please say aye. Those against, please say no. Meeting the ayes have it. This honorable chamber stands adjourned until Friday, the 5th day of March at 10 a.m. in the forenoon.